In the darkest corridors of European history, where power and betrayal intertwine like venomous serpents, few stories cut as deeply as that of a queen effectively buried alive by her own blood. This is not a tale of medieval torture or foreign invasions, but something far more sinister. The systematic destruction of a woman's life, liberty, and legacy by her very own family. Joanna of Castile, known to history as Joanna the Mad, was chillingly declared insane not by unbiased physicians but by calculating politicians. Her true crime was not madness but the profound misfortune of being born a woman with a legitimate claim to one of Europe's most powerful thrones. For nearly 50 years, she would endure a living tomb, watching helplessly as her father, her husband, and finally her own son stripped away everything that was rightfully hers, reducing her to a mere shadow of a queen. The year was 1479 when Joanna entered a world shaped by ruthless political machinations. Born into the powerful royal house of Castile and Aragon, she was the third child of Isabella of Castile and Ferdinand II of Aragon, the famous Catholic monarchs who would unite Spain. In this powerful, ambitious family, children were rarely cherished offspring. Instead, they were seen as valuable chess pieces in the grand, high-stakes game of European politics. What makes Joanna's story particularly haunting is not just the brutality of her treatment, but the sophisticated, insidious nature of the conspiracy against her. This was a masterclass in psychological warfare, meticulous legal manipulation, and insidious propaganda. Tools that would be refined and perfected by authoritarian regimes for centuries to come. The castle of Tordesillas, where Joanna would tragically spend the final decades of her life, still stands today as a grim monument to one of history's most calculated acts of familial betrayal. The Spain of Joanna's childhood was a nation in the throes of profound religious and cultural transformation. The Reconquista was nearing its completion, a country intoxicated by its own success and increasingly intolerant of anything that threatened its newly consolidated power. In such an environment, even royal children learned that absolute loyalty to the crown superseded all other considerations. Joanna's education reflected these demands. She was taught languages, music, and arts, but more importantly, the harsh realities of political life. That treaties were made to be broken, alliances shifted, and even family could become enemies. These lessons would prove tragically prophetic. The royal court of Castile was a place where paranoia was not madness, but a vital survival instinct, and Joanna learned early to guard her thoughts. Ironically, this very prudence would later be twisted into evidence of her mental instability. As Joanna matured, her sharp intelligence and independent spirit, qualities admired in a male heir, were viewed with profound suspicion in a daughter destined to rule. Her differing opinions were immediately characterized as early symptoms of dangerous mental instability, the insidious narrative to destroy her already meticulously constructed. In 1496, at just 17, Joanna's parents announced her betrothal to Philip of Habsburg, Philip the Handsome. This marriage was a strategic alliance to encircle France. For Ferdinand and Isabella, it was a masterstroke. For Joanna, the beginning of her destruction. Philip, charming yet manipulative, sought Spanish wealth and power while continuing his notorious infidelities. He viewed Joanna as a tool, not a partner. Joanna genuinely fell in love with Philip, a fact later cruelly used against her as emotional instability. In rigid royal protocol, passion was dangerous. A queen was to be controlled. Her true feelings were twisted by court observers into alarming signs of an unbalanced mind. Philip quickly laid groundwork for a psychological campaign to destroy her reputation. His true manipulative nature revealed itself. Charm became cynical manipulation. Love exposed as psychological warfare. Philip's infidelities were overtly flaunted, a deliberate strategy to humiliate Joanna and undermine her confidence. He surrounded himself with mistresses, conducted affairs openly, and ensured news reached his wife. In the brutal calculus of royal marriages, a broken wife was easier to control, less likely to assert claims. The court of the Netherlands, initially welcoming, gradually turned against Joanna under Philip's pervasive influence. Her normal reactions to his cruel provocations were transformed into damning evidence of profound mental instability. He alternated feigned affection with cold rejection, controlled her information, isolated her, and surrounded her with loyalists. Her anger or distress were immediately characterized as madness, trapping her. Even the birth of their many children was twisted. Philip used them as tools of control, threatening access if she resisted, ensuring they viewed him with loyalty and her with suspicion. Observers outside Philip's circle noted Joanna's supposed madness only manifested due to his provocations. When engaged in governance or intellectual pursuits, she appeared lucid and capable, facts ignored or misinterpreted by those benefiting from her marginalization. By 1504, the psychological campaign succeeded. Her reputation for mental instability was established fact across European courts. Philip had chillingly transformed her from a legitimate heir into a figure of pity and suspicion. The death of Queen Isabella in 1504 should have marked Joanna's undisputed ascension. Instead, it became the pivotal moment for the conspiracy. Isabella's will recognized Joanna as heir but contained a devastating provision. If unable or unwilling to govern, Ferdinand would serve as regent. This reasonable clause for temporary incapacity was ruthlessly transformed by Ferdinand and Philip into a permanent justification to deny her the throne. Ferdinand shamelessly spread rumors of her mental state, questioning her fitness. Philip seized the opportunity, styling himself King of Castile, demanding her rights. Her resistance was perverse, characterized as further proof of incompetence. Any assertion of legitimate authority was used as evidence of unfitness, trapping her. This exposed the misogyny underlying the conspiracy. Her grief pathologized as excessive, her anger dismissed as feminine hysteria. Male rulers displaying similar emotions were seen as strong. In Joanna, it was madness. European courts watched the succession crisis unfold. Many foreign observers were skeptical of the convenient madness claims, noting their suspicious timing and clear political benefits to Ferdinand and Philip. Yet doubts were rarely public. Propaganda against Joanna intensified. Fabricated stories circulated about her bizarre behaviors, blurring truth and fiction. The unexpected death of Philip the Handsome in September 1506 at just 28 should have freed Joanna. Instead, it sealed her fate, providing her enemies their most powerful weapon. Philip's death in Burgos, officially typhoid but rumored poison, created a power vacuum Ferdinand exploited. Joanna's overwhelming grief, her refusal to separate from his body meticulous arrangements for its transport, was cynically distorted into the horrifying centerpiece of her madness legend. This narrative, endlessly repeated, depicted a madwoman compulsively traveling with her husband's corpse, unable to distinguish living from dead. The grim truth was far more mundane, far less useful politically. Ferdinand ruthlessly portrayed himself as a concerned father protecting the kingdom from his unstable daughter. His regency, originally temporary, was indefinitely extended. Every day Ferdinand remained in control made it harder for Joanna to reclaim her position. International reaction revealed male power structures dominating European politics. Foreign courts, once allies, now treated her as a tragic figure, her claims safely ignored. Her desperate attempts to assert authority were systematically undermined and misinterpreted. Any action was interpreted through the pre-established lens of her madness, creating an inescapable narrative trap. This propaganda was so effective it influences history today. Modern scholars note the suspicious timing of her breakdowns and the political convenience of her incapacitation, yet the image of the Mad Queen traveling with her husband's corpse endures more than evidence of conspiracy. By 1509, Ferdinand had consolidated control. Joanna's queenly status was meaningless. Her father became de facto ruler. She was trapped in legal and political limbo, denied real authority. Government operated without her input, laws passed in her name without her knowledge, taxes collected under her authority for Ferdinand's benefit. She became a ghost queen, present on paper, absent from power, reduced to a mere signature on documents she rarely read. This systematic exclusion was justified by the accepted narrative of her mental incapacity. Ferdinand's control reached into her intimate daily life. He dictated where she lived, whom she saw, and what activities were permitted. Correspondence was monitored, visitors screened, movements restricted. She was a prisoner in her own kingdom. Loyal courtiers were purged, silenced by fear. Religious authorities provided moral justification for her confinement, proclaiming it Christian charity. Economic interests aligned with Ferdinand. New World gold and trade boosted prosperity, and beneficiaries had no incentive to support Joanna, her madness a convenient excuse. As Ferdinand aged, questions arose about the arrangement's sustainability. Foreign courts wondered what would happen when her son Charles came of age. The prospect of her restoration created an undercurrent of uncertainty, leading to more drastic measures. Ferdinand's death in 1516 marked a new, darker chapter. Power passed to her grandson Charles, soon Emperor Charles V. Any hope for mercy from a new generation was extinguished. Charles, indoctrinated to view his mother as dangerous, proved even more ruthless, formalizing her imprisonment. Charles' attitude was shaped by those who engineered her downfall. He believed her confinement was politically necessary and morally justified. This narrative was so embedded he never questioned it. Power transferred without consulting Joanna. She was merely informed of her father's death and son's ascension. Her rights meant nothing. Charles's first act was to issue decrees confirming her permanent confinement in Tordesillas and codifying strict restrictions. What were temporary measures became permanent imperial policy. European courts witnessed the institutionalization of a reigning queen's legalized imprisonment by her own son, setting a chilling precedent. Joanna's reaction to Charles's consolidation was resigned despair mixed with defiant anger. She knew Charles was her last hope. His decision meant a life as captive. The psychological impact was devastating. International acceptance of Charles' treatment reflected Europe's consensus. Political stability outweighed individual justice. Joanna's fate became a diplomatic non-issue forgotten by former allies. The castle of Tordesillas, where Joanna would spend her final 46 years, became both her prison and tomb. Transformed into an elaborate cage under Charles's orders, its modifications meticulously prevented escape while maintaining a facade of royal dignity. Her physical confinement was calculated to break her spirit without outright cruelty. Comfortable but restricted quarters, monotonous meals, repetitive routines. She was allowed approved books, vetted visitors. Every aspect of her existence was controlled. Staff were spies, reporting every word. She lived under constant surveillance, unable to speak freely. The psychological torture was more insidious than physical abuse. She understood world events in kingdoms that should have been hers, but was powerless to influence them. She watched from her windows as her son's agents conducted vast imperial business, trapped in enforced irrelevance. Her admirable, heartbreaking attempts to maintain dignity. Dressing as a queen, observing protocols, intellectual pursuits, were perversely seen as further evidence of her madness by captors. Her isolation was the cruelest aspect. Denied meaningful human contact, friends, or allies, she was prevented from forming supportive relationships. Her children visited rarely under strict supervision, encounters more painful than comforting, reminding her of family bonds corrupted by politics. Reports from Tordesillas, filtered by Charles's administrators, consistently portrayed her as hopelessly mad, creating false documentation accepted by future generations. Yet evidence of her sanity occasionally leaked. Visitors reported sharp minds, informed political knowledge, and rational analyses in letters escaping censorship. Diplomatic accounts subtly indicated her competence. Medical opinions, despite pressure, sometimes suggested melancholy and despair rather than severe mental illness. The Comuneros Revolt of 1520 to 1521 provided dramatic evidence of Joanna's political awareness. When rebels took Tordesillas, attempting to restore her, her responses showed keen intelligence and caution. Her refusal to fully embrace their cause was called madness, but could be seen as prudent judgment. Chroniclers not employed by the court contradicted official narratives, describing her as sad and resigned, intelligent and aware. The cumulative effect of these testimonies created a counter-narrative. Her longevity also raised questions. Truly insane 16th-century individuals rarely lived so long. Her survival into her 70s with enough clarity to be deemed dangerous suggested her madness was exaggerated. The continued vigilance of her guards ironically proved her mental faculties were feared and respected. The legacy of Joanna the Mad is one of history's most successful character assassinations. A masterpiece of propaganda transforming a legitimate queen into pity and ridicule. Her story became a cautionary tale about female rule and mental illness, obscuring a calculated conspiracy. This narrative proved so durable it still influences perceptions 5 centuries later. Her case provided a chilling template for disposing of inconvenient female rulers through cynical mental instability allegations, a tactic used repeatedly in history. It eased male relatives challenging women's authority by questioning their emotional stability. The institutional mechanisms of her imprisonment became models for later political control and repression, demonstrating how legitimate institutions could be corrupted and weaponized. International acceptance of Joanna's treatment set dangerous precedents for violating royal prerogatives. European courts learned even blatant injustices could be overlooked if presented with legal and medical justification. Other monarchs ignored her plight for diplomatic stability, revealing dynastic solidarity's limits and international law's weakness in protecting individual rights. Modern scholarship now meticulously reassesses her story, noting the suspicious timing of breakdowns, unanimity of witnesses, and political benefits to her male relatives. This revisionist approach gradually restores dignity to her memory, though the popular image persists. The psychological impact on her descendants was profound. Her children grew up believing their mother dangerous, shaping their governance. The trauma rippled through generations, creating patterns of suspicion and control in the Habsburg dynasty. Methods of oppression are obsolete, but power, gender, and political manipulation dynamics remain relevant. Her story reminds us, closest allies can be greatest enemies. Protective systems can be instruments of oppression. Her legend's evolution from propaganda to historical fact shows truth's fragility when power rewrites reality. In our age of information warfare, her case illustrates how sophisticated propaganda shapes historical memory. Techniques used: character assassination, isolation, manipulation of authority, destruction of evidence, remain disturbingly familiar. The ultimate tragedy of Joanna's life was not just immense suffering, but that her experience was erased, replaced by fabrication. She died in 1555 at Tordesillas, powerless, forgotten. Her death was barely noted, her burial minimal. Yet, in recovering Joanna's true story, piece by painstaking piece, we achieve a small victory over forces that sought to erase her. Every document, testimony, and assumption questioned brings understanding, helping prevent similar tragedies. The lesson of Joanna the Mad is ultimately about truth's fragility against concentrated power, and the ease with which fundamental rights are stripped away when politically expedient. Her story reminds us that freedom demands eternal vigilance, not just against external enemies, but against potential betrayal by those we trust most. Remembering her, we honor her memory and our commitment to justice, truth, and protecting the vulnerable. The weathered walls of Tordesillas still stand, a monument to human cruelty and resilience. Within, a queen lived and died a prisoner, her voice silenced but never truly broken. Her story, finally emerging from propaganda's shadows, serves as both an indictment of the past and a crucial warning for the future. In the end, perhaps that is the most fitting legacy for a woman whose greatest crime was simply being born with rights that powerful men were determined to steal.